Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our podcast series on the category of Ancient Wisdom Demystified. Today's topic is the Anunnaki, the creator of the Homo sapiens. So, Tata, me being brought up as a Christian, has always been taught that God created the world and that, he was the one who created man and everything else.
Yes,
So,
very true.
is that the real story or is something else the truth?
Well, I can tell you what it is actually. See, we are not here when we talk about the Anunnakis as the creator of the human beings. We are not very much deviating from what was told in the Genesis, in the first book of the Bible. The Genesis actually is today very much accepted, especially the creation of the world and the man, is accepted by the Catholic theology, the Anglican theology, and the Lutheran theology as a mythological story to give a deeper meaning as to what exactly happened. So, in fact, the first 2 centuries of the Christian era, after Christ, there were many people who came up and they started questioning basically the Old Testament. Apart from the books of the prophet, all the other books which were either quasi-historical or allegorical. When I say allegorical, these are stories told in the form to express some deeper truth. So Genesis is one of the such books because the God of Eden is nothing but a God who demands that we obey him. Now, you just imagine a God who is just demanding obedience. It is nothing more like it's a man asking something, or a king or a ruler asking something of the subjects, or a master asking of the slave.
Yeah.
So what really happened was that these stories were told at that time because when Moses wrote the Pentateuch, he had no other way of expressing the creation but to take something from the ancient Sumerian mythology. Now, Sumerian mythology fitted very well with the Genesis because the creator God in Genesis and the creator God in Enuma Elish, you see last time we saw that one, is Enki with Marduk.
Yeah.
Now, that's why in the first centuries of the Christian era, there was a group of people called the Gnostics.
Gnostics.
Yeah. Gnostic means people of knowledge. Gnosis means in Greek knowledge. Now, these people actually were questioning this particular story and they said, no, the God of Eden is what we call as a demiurge, the creator God. If you go to the story of the Sumerian clay tablets, it practically coincides with the Genesis. But what we are doing is here, in Genesis, we think the absolute God came down and created man. But why should an absolute God come down and create? He could use his own creator. And that is what we see in the particular reference to Genesis as the God of Eden who tells the people, don't eat of this, don't eat of that. If you eat, then you will be banished from the place. It all becomes like a human judgmental ruler. It is not exactly that. So the absolute God, that is why we see even in the Sumerian text, Anu is supposed to be called the God of heavens or God of the sky.
Yeah.
And his sons who came down, especially Enki, was appointed to organize the whole of the earthly kingdom. And he was the person who creates the human beings. And why he creates, we will see in this particular series. So, we will now go into the actual, story behind the Anunnakis and the human creation.
Okay, so Tata, who were the Anunnakis and from where did they come from?
Well, as you see in the Enuma Elish, the Anunnakis were the sky people who came down from heaven from Neburu. You remember last time we talked about Neburu. And they were the people who had a highly advanced technology. They could land. And in fact, why they chose a space near the Tigris-Euphrates river was because it was very fertile and there was a lot of gold in the river. So panning gold could be easy. And why they came to earth was because they were actually looking for gold to protect their planet. Because their planet was coming close to the sun and gold is a good heat shield. So, since they were running out of gold, they see, knowing that this planet has got gold, they came down to harvest gold. So this is how they came to the earth, and you could see that they landed on the water, which is the actually the river coming in to meet the sea, was the ideal place where they could land. And very near to the the mouth of the river, they had what they call the ziggurats, the landing pads, and you can see them even today.
Nice.
Yeah, huge like pyramid like structure with that platform on the top where they could come and land. So this was actually the, and many mythologies, if we go back, you will see that people flying in helicopters, people flying in, in the planes, all the chariots flying in Old
Yeah.
Testament. In Old Testament, you have Ezekiel seeing God coming in a chariot. So all these are like mapping to what really happened, or what was the knowledge that was available at that time. So that is why Anunnakis came basically from another planet, which was making a very elliptical orbit around the sun, and they found Earth was in the appropriate position with the adequate amount of gold. So they came and landed here to harvest the gold.
Okay,
That
so
was the purpose.
when did they come here exactly?
So it was actually, I think, probably about 400,000 years before today. So they came, and as I told you, they settled in near the Euphrates and Tigris, which was golden crescent, so to say.
Yeah.
It had both gold as well as the ideal for agriculture.
Okay, so how many ships did they come in? Like,
Quite a number of trips and quite a number of ships, because only a few people could come, and it's not very high number of people who came. I think what we have from the clay tablets, there were about 600 people who came. That's all total.
okay.
So that was the number of people who came. And one more thing, why I am saying that 400,000 years before, if you look at the clay tablet, you will find that the number of kings, there were about 8 kings during the time of, from the time they landed to the time of the first leaving of the Anunnakis. It was about 240,000 years. Only 8 kings. And you can imagine each king was ruling for such a long time, which means they were special people. They were not the ordinary human beings. They were the sky people who had long life.
30,000 years almost?
Oh yeah, 30,000 to 40,000 years they could, be
Alive.
and also ruling the what do you call that area.
Okay.
So that was the reason that they, they came and then they were there. Now,
Okay. So then, like, how did they create the humans? And like, what were humans
see
before that?
the problem was that, why the problem started was the Anunnakis, when they were in this Tigris Euphrates basin and panning gold, it was quite an easy job. But they ran out of gold there. And they had good scouting spacecrafts. And they scouted and found that there was absolutely a lot of gold deep down in the mines in South Africa. So what they did was, they sent 300 of these people, out of 600, 300 were sent to South Africa, dig out the gold and bring it up. And they could use the flight to ferry the gold. But when they went there, they found it was too hard for them. They were very soft people. They were, easy life. And they could not do their job. And that's when they struck the idea. And you remember Enuma Elish told that we will create man as our slaves. So that was the primary intention of the Creator God. That's why he says, don't eat of the fruit of knowledge, because you will know and you will become like God. That's why the serpent tells them that you will become like God. You know why? The serpent, Enki's standard, which is the flag, is a serpent flag. So now you can see how this relates to these two particular stories. And here we have Enki as the primary architect, and he is a person who is creating human beings about 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. Exactly coincides with the time when the Homo sapiens appeared on Earth. 400,000 years before, they were Neanderthals. And what they did was, they took the Neanderthal female and then modified the egg and planted it and created the human being. That was the first petri dish human being created out of the womb. What is the modern technology that we have? In vitro fertilization. So this was done quite some time back by this advanced, technology of people who came from the heavens, and they created human beings. So this was the story of how human beings were created. And their last trip, because they came, some of them left. Champ's magnetic pole shifted. So there was a lot of problem. So some of them left. But many of them left during the last trip when they took before the flood. Because they knew the flood is coming. Because they knew geological situation depending on the movement of the stars and all that. And so they left just before the flood, great flood, which was about 13,000 years before today. So the first going was in 43,000 years before. The second going was around 13,000 years before. So that was how they went from here.
So then what happened after the flood?
You see, they were very clever people, and they didn't want to destroy the human beings, especially Enki. Though the gods wanted to destroy them because they were revolting and they were becoming more and more. If you read the Bible, if you read the Genesis, the sons of God had relation with the daughters of human beings because they were so very beautiful, and the children they produced were giants. They were called the Nephilim. If you read the Bible, you will find the name Nephilim. Now, on seeing this, the sky gods were very angry. They said, no, these people should not be alive. Let us send the flood and then destroy the entire. Sending the flood and destroying them, because most people live around the river banks. Because it's a fertile area. So there was a plot, and Enki knew this one. So what he did was ask them to build a boat and get in. So here's the Noah story. And also he not only did that one, he sent out before the flood, much before the flood, 7 wise men to different parts of the world. The 7 Saptarshis in Vedanta, and the 7 wise men in Turkey. You can still see the statues of them in a circular form in Göbekli Tepe. We'll talk about it later in another episode. And so we have got all over the world, and also in Egypt, the pyramids, building of pyramids and all that. They were all done by the 7 wise men who were left behind to give this knowledge to people. But they had limitation because majority of the people left, the majority of the Anunnakis left at that particular time. So the few wise men who stayed back started introducing agriculture and also expanding the knowledge of man. So that's why man, who was practically a slave before the Anunnakis left, they become the inheritors of as much technology as could possible. That's why we started from scratch almost. So this is the story. And how do you know this story is true? This is basically a question that you can ask me. How do you know that it's true?
How is it true?
Well, it is true mainly because we have biological discoveries to do. Only the Homo sapiens has got 23 pairs of chromosomes. Neanderthals don't have. And what we find is human chromosome number 2 is actually 2 chromosomes fused together. Who did fuse them together? How was the genetic engineering done? These are questions that are being asked today because some agency must have been there. It could not be an evolutionary trajectory, because it cannot happen suddenly. Within about 10,000 years, suddenly the 2 chromosomes come together. And also there is one more thing, that in 2001, it was discovered and identified. They have a transcriptional target of a gene called FOXP2. And that is what is mainly linked to speech, language and brain development of the human beings. How did it suddenly appear there? 125,000 years ago, suddenly you see a change in the human beings of this particular gene, which is specific and more prolific in human beings. It is there in other species, but it's more prolific in human beings and became the prominent person, so that you could have speech, you could have more cognitive ability, etc., etc. This is the story of how the Anunnakis created human beings and how it coincides with what the Genesis story tells us, but in much more detail, and why the Genesis story is allegorical and should not be literally interpreted. All this comes around with this particular type of analysis. So, thank you very much. It's been a very nice discussion and very illuminating, and hope to take up further topics on this in the coming weeks. Okay. Thank you very much and see you soon. Bye.